Can good design shape a better world? At Monocle's Quality of Life conference in Barcelona this September, we'll be putting that question to the people who already are. Join leading designers, architects, and creative leaders as we explore how design intersects with culture, business, and everyday life. Plus, great food, excellent company, and plenty of Catalan charm. Find out more and book your seat at monocle.com/conference.
This is Monocle on Design, a show where we discuss everything from architecture and craft to furniture and graphic design. I'm Nick Bernice. On today's program, the Shakers, an American church that was prominent in the 18th century and inspired generations of makers and designers across the globe. Then, in Senegal, we visit the home of a brand that is continuing the story of hand-spun Falé cotton. And we continue that thread in Norway, where we stop over at an event celebrating the legacy of the weaver Hannah Ryggen. All that coming up on Monocle on Design. Hello and welcome to today's program. We start by looking at the Shakers, a religious sect that had sizable communities across the United States in the 19th century. They were known for their communal living, celibacy, and, surprisingly, their design prowess. The religious group's contributions to art and furniture range far and wide, so much so that the Vitra Design Museum, located on the Swiss-German border, is exploring it in a new exhibition. Called Shakers, A World in the Making, it explains the complex spiritual and social context that allowed this group to influence so many creatives. To find out more and see what we might learn from the Shakers today, I caught up with the exhibition's curator, Mia Hoffman, down the line. I began by asking who the Shakers were.
The Shakers were a religious group that was founded in England in the 18th century by a woman, a textile worker, who was called Mother Ann Lee. And they then emigrated to the United States in 1774, where they founded their settlements. What makes them really special is that they are known for their radical beliefs, their communal lifestyle, and their distinctive contributions to design, architecture, but also to music and agriculture. They embrace social equality, communal property, and pacifism. Going to these sites, most of them are now turned into museums. What is really striking is that you can really feel that holistic vision where everything, be it a building, a tool, a piece of furniture, is inherently an expression of their worldview and faith. So a very cohesive, holistic idea of their quest to create heaven on earth.
I think that's the thing that fascinates me. It's this holistic vision that then takes a physical form. How does or do the Shakers' values then translate to a tangible, real product?
Labor and making were acts of worship. So this idea of kind of a Protestant notion of diligence and usefulness to create, first of all, what they needed for their everyday lives to survive. And then soon they set out to sell their objects to fund their communities. But in terms of aesthetics, they refused any kind of ornament as it was seen as prideful. This idea of, or almost this kind of myth of simplicity. So really reducing objects to their essentials, be that in terms of aesthetics, geometric forms, harmony, but also vernacular use of materials and a very kind of intentional approach to making. So I'd say those are maybe some of the factors where you can see their worldview. So this idea of stripping it down to what is needed and what is visually in line with their worldview.
Do you think that's part of the ongoing appeal of the Shakers, like this simplicity in their work? Is that what so many of us are searching for and find embodied in their product?
I think very much, but I also think that there is a certain mythology tied to that. So what's interesting actually to me about the Shakers is like any other society, there were lots of different styles and developments, evolutions of style. So actually in the middle of the 19th century, they embraced much more ornate forms, so more Victorian style designs, because they were also very much catering to the market and to changing tastes of the time. Yet in comparison to the styles around them, the objects were still very much focused on utility. So that focus of what is an object for, how to create something that has very high quality and is going to last. that was the main focus, more so than the kind of a modernist reading of it. I think that is really what happened then in hindsight, because we have so few written records of why the Shakers designed what they did and how, that is really subject to a lot of interpretation. But I think that idea of simplicity that has, of course, also influenced many designers and architects and modernist designers as well, thinking about the Scandinavian designers of the 20th century, that it has very much still appeal. And the objects, they do have an incredible aura. They have this certain timelessness that is really impactful.
You mentioned the proto-modernist reading of the Shaker movement and saying that there were times when they were a little bit more ornate. Tell us some of the misconceptions or misguided narratives around Shaker design. Is there anything where you hear people talking about it and you go, whoa, 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 not quite like that?
That general idea of Shaker design as being static and not changing. We're looking at a history of 250 years. There were many different industries they developed. So we are mainly familiar with their furniture, but they created many different things, machines, tools, but also, for instance, a whole seeds industry and medicine. So I think that is one misconception, that they were, on the one hand, also understood themselves as designers, which is not the case. They were a religious group, and for them, it was really very much about a kind of pragmatism to create, again, what they needed to live. And yet that sense of there's one Shaker style. I think there was a particular period in the 20th century where that style was very much established, but that was subject to change. The other thing is maybe thinking of the Shakers in line with many other religious groups, such as the Amish, for instance, that they would not be open to technology, which was not at all the case. So they were very innovative in terms of how they created also the tools they needed, but also how they embraced technology and innovation from the outside world. Although they were separated in many ways, they were never fully self-sufficient, but they really relied on trade and were open to these changes. And you can see that in the use of technologies. We, for instance, show a radio in the exhibition, so a connection still to that outside world. But also, for instance, we're exhibiting a steam engine, and they've also patented a lot of their innovations, which is actually contradictory to their guidelines, the Millennium Laws, which stated that the idea of authorship wasn't encouraged.
That's quite fascinating. Is it also difficult to kind of attribute exactly who this work belongs to? Like it belongs to the Shakers as a whole, not individuals? Or is there a standout Shaker designer like a Jay Osgerby or a Patricia Urquiola? Or does that not exist?
No, of course, there were plenty of scholars who researched and also looked into the diaries that we have on record from the Shakers. So there are definitely many Shaker craftsmen that are quite well known and that created incredible output. Shakers really took on many different roles. Division of labor was a bit more traditional, I'd say. So women would do textile work and work in the kitchen. Men would create the furniture. Then in the years where there were less men, women took on some of these roles. But in terms of authorship, we do have records of certain objects. So there's a lot of contradiction, I think, in the Shaker history, which makes it so interesting in terms of creating for the greater good of the community, this rejection of individualism. And yet, of course, people are people, they have different skill sets. You can read objects in this way, but the general consensus is that there's a lot of collaboration as well.
I want to ask you a little bit about being in these Shaker villages, which you visited in preparation for the exhibition. I know they're almost museums now, but I appreciate that the goal of the exhibition isn't, I guess, to romanticize or mythologize them. How did your own experience in these spaces kind of break down some of your preconceptions about who the Shakers are and what they stood for?
It's difficult to say because the spaces that are preserved, they're absolutely stunning. So this, first of all, the scale, a lot of the architecture was, of course, catered to the need of these larger communities with up to 100 brothers and sisters living in shared dwelling houses. So you can feel that scale of what it means to live collectively. What's also interesting is the genderedness of the spaces. So the Shakers were celibate, and yet they lived together, however, separated by mirrored staircases, mirrored hallways, seated separately. So that is something that is really fascinating, but also the sense of aura of harmony. But then there's also a lot of curation involved in that. And yet this order, the kind of simplicity in a sense of quality is really interesting. So that's definitely something that's undeniable. Of course, we have the objects, we have the surroundings, the settings, but they're really human. Like you can feel the life of these communities. And I think that's what's really intriguing. A lot of the artists that are also thinking about the shakers today. So not only looking at the object culture, the material culture, but really at these questions around how do we want to create a world, or what does it mean to create your own world according to your own sets of values? How do we want to live collectively? That is something that is quite different looking at the object on pictures, but to be in the space and imagine what life would feel like there.
You mentioned some of the contemporary artists reflecting on the shakers and shaker principles today. Some of their work is even shown in the exhibition. I guess with this in mind, what do you think we can learn from, maybe not the religious principles, let's leave that to one side, but learn from the design principles of the shakers today?
What's fascinating is this very strong sense of intentionality towards making, so this ethical system of design. I think that's also something that a lot of designers were fascinated by over the years. What's needed, where the materials are sourced, how we can look at traditions. That's something that some of the designers that are part of the show are also looking at. How do we create something for the future that is meaningful, that is useful? And again, of course, this idea of utility. So the shakers are quite interesting also in the sense that they were very active and innovative and clever businessmen. While we're speaking about the 18th, 19th century, where industrialization and the capitalism as we know it were just about to start, they were, on the one hand, very much tied to these ideas and notions of ethics, and at the same time quite actively engaged in the market. So I think that's also a really interesting tension to look at.
I mean, my understanding is that the last major exhibition of shaker design in Europe was in the late 90s at the Barbican in London, but you've got this huge exhibition of scale at Vitra now. How do you think the conversation around the shakers has evolved in recent years, and where do you think we're at now in terms of interpreting their practices and who they were?
I mean, there were plenty of exhibitions in the States, and there seems to be a surge at the moment. More tangible questions are the main focus at the moment. So, of course, the craftsmanship, the material culture. Again, these questions around democratic design remains extremely relevant, and their fusion of utilitarianism and quality, but also those notions around thinking about our current times, community and togetherness and climate change, and how we can position ourselves through making, but also just simply through exchange of ideas and conversation. So in that sense, I do think that there's a return of interest in the shakers as also inherently tied to the founding myth of the US, thinking about the 250-year anniversary next year and questions around, again, democracy and collective living. Over the last century, there has been continuous interest in the shakers, but always in very different aspects. And I think that's also what makes them so interesting, is they have so many connecting points to offer for artists and designers. And as you say, maybe not with regard to everything in our contemporary context, but there's a lot of tension and productive inspiration they offer.
My thanks to Mia Hoffman there. The Shakers, A World in the Making, is on at the Vitra Design Museum in Weil am Rhein until the 28th of September 2025. It will later tour the USA with showcases planned at the Milwaukee Museum of Art and the Institute of Contemporary Art in Philadelphia. For more information, keep an eye on the exhibition website. There's no shortage of African-born designers and architects now getting international recognition for their work. But their popularity doesn't always come along with appreciation for the production chain that stands behind it. That's something that Senegalese artist Fatim Soumaré and her husband Laurent Grisel want to change with their brand Falé. Fatim has always been fascinated by textiles, and her mother was a specialist in the craft of dyeing. She also trained at the loom and frequently incorporates fabric in her works. After more than a decade in France, Fatim moved back to Senegal in 2020 and realised that ancestral crafts were about to disappear. Under threat were practices such as the hand-spinning of rain-fed cotton. And so Falé was born to safeguard this tradition, bringing together 200 craftswomen across 5 villages in the nation's south. These skilled workers make the brand's curtains, rugs, cushions and all sorts of textiles for interiors. Monocle's Chiara Romella visited the couple's Dakar home to find out more. She began by asking Laurent how and why the pair started the project.
Then, end of 2020, Fatim at this time was living in France, and we were in the COVID period, I would say. Then she came back to Senegal for 1 month holiday at the beginning, But she always has this idea of project here, and then she used this time to travel in the country. And she went to the south of Senegal, in this area, and she met some women who hand-spun the cotton with hands, which is an ancestral tradition. Then she fell in love of this know-how, of this practice, and she decided to set up a project to bring more visibility, more value, and also to help those women to be more structured. And then that was the start of the project, this meeting with these women who have this very precious know-how in different villages in this area of the south of Senegal.
How come this method of production was forgotten for such a long time? You know, it's obviously very labor-intensive, but does Senegal have a tradition of cotton weaving in this way, and why was it at risk of being lost?
This tradition exists from Senegal, but also from the other neighbor country of West Africa, and I would say globally of many countries in Africa. When we start, the average age of the women we are working with in the village was about 75 years old. And if nothing is done, globally, it will disappear in 10-15 years. Then we are very near about this probably disappear of this knowledge, of this know-how, which is very precious. Then that was the kickoff of the project, I would say.
What are you doing to ensure that this knowledge is passed on? Are there new young generations that are now being involved in the project because there is an outcome for the product, or how is this generational knowledge being passed now?
There is the aspect of the price, of the money, because if you want more people interested and youngest people interested to do it, regarding the quantity of hours you need to make 1 kilo of thread, it was one of the first actions we did. It was to increase the price women could expect to get it before, because most of the women we met at the beginning continue to do it, I would say, more like a pleasure, only make some small sales on the village market, I would say, but at a very low price. And then after, the challenge for us, for sure, is to manage to sell the creation, because for sure, due to everything is done manually, and we pay everything at the right price, I would say, regarding the time. We continue to want to increase the chain value around this project. And then after, for sure, the challenge is to be able to find customers who understand the process, the product, the creation, and the value around it, which is today very rare.
What about the designs themselves? Who designs the objects? What about the aesthetics? Are you and Fatim involved in that, or do you also collaborate with other designers?
Today we are making, I would say, a collective design. Globally, Fatim makes some designs, I do some designs. The people who work with us at the workshop, who are behind the loom, for example, also the other person working with who does broderie. It's collective design. Sometimes design comes, I would say, like a surprise, or it was not. We also do some experimentation, and sometimes some designs are done by several people of the workshop. Then there is not this one designer. It's a collective design, and also for sure we use also the feedback of our customer, and also when we have different models today, for example, of rugs. We can present a customer, and a customer can ask us to make a creation mixing 2 models of rugs, because, like I said, it's only on-demand creation, then it's very open, I would say. And for sure, tomorrow we are not close to make some collaboration with designer from Senegal or from other place. That could be also interesting to have a collaboration around it.
What about the community of designers that surrounds you in Senegal? You know, we are currently sat on this beautiful armchair and this wonderful sofa. There's a few really standout pieces by designers in your home. What is the scene like? Is it very tight? Do people know each other and help each other? And how have you seen it grow ever since you've moved here 7 years ago?
For sure, there is a lot of creativity here. And also, like we discussed just before about the Biennale, and especially about the design section, which was a big meeting, I would say, exhibition of many creators from Senegal, but also from Ivory Coast and also other countries, essentially in this area of Africa. There is a lot of creativity and more events to be able to show what people can do here, because here there is a very large quantity of know-how, of fiber, of material. We have everything to do fantastic creation. And after, the challenge is to be able to structure it, to drive it, and after, for sure, to have the right communications, the right event participations to be able to sell it, I would say. Then that is a real challenge to be able to go over the border and to show.
Laurent Grizel of Falé in conversation with Monocle's Chiara Rumella. From textiles in Senegal to weaving in Norway, we finished today's show in Trondheim, where the Hannah Ryggen Triennale is taking place. A citywide showcase, it celebrates the work of weaver Hannah Ryggen, who lived and practiced in the rural islands outside of the city. In her lifetime, Ryggen received international acclaim for her large-scale political tapestries that can be seen displayed alongside other contemporary artists at a variety of exhibitions during the Triennale. Monocle's Nora Hool, an expert audio producer, went along and sent us this report.
Born in Sweden, Hannah Ryggen was an artist based on the small rural island of Fosen outside of Trondheim in Norway. Working with textiles, she was a political artist that spoke up not just for herself, but for the weaker voices in her own society and beyond. With a great understanding of color and a humorous thread, she portrayed important figures and events, including a beheaded Mussolini in her work Ethiopia from 1935, which was censored with a sheet of paper covering his face at the 1937 World Art Fair in Paris. Today, her critical and anti-fascist oeuvre is more relevant than ever. Her work Blood in the Grass from 1966, a protest against the Vietnam War depicting Lyndon B. Johnson wearing a cowboy hat, was recently shown at the Barbican as part of the exhibition Unravel, The Power and Politics of Textile in Art. The Hannah Ryggen Triennale is organized by the Nordenfjeldske Kunstindustrimuseum, and for the 2025 iteration, they have invited other institutions in Trondheim to partake, including their sister gallery Trondheim Kunstmuseum. I spoke to the head curator of Trondheim Kunstmuseum, Marianne Samechnik, about their exhibition Passing Motherhood, which showcases Ryggen alongside other international artists, including Louise Bourgeois and Katte Kollwitz. I started by asking Marianne how Passing Motherhood had interpreted the theme of this year's Triennale.
Our museum decided to choose a topic that was very closely related to the overarching theme, mater, the Latin word, that can be interpreted in a number of ways. But because the Triennale is relatively new and the public in Trondheim and also internationally are not familiar yet, in many cases with the Triennale, we thought it best to stay very close to the topic of motherhood.
We're standing in front of a poem. Tell us about it.
Yeah, this is a poem written by a Swedish-Iranian poet, Athena Farrokhzad. It's called A Letter to a Warrior. And it was a poem that she was writing to her unborn child that was still in her belly. The poem is quite long and it can be read in full on our website and in the catalog. But on the wall here we see fragments that has been chosen by my co-curator Janja Michalina and myself, that as you read them, I mean, you can hear that it is a lot of fear and insecurity that a mother feels when she's imagining the future for their child. In this case, the work really emphasizes this passing on of trauma that comes with migration and displacement as a result of war. Her being a second-generation immigrant from Iran, the trauma, it creates a rupture in the family history. And in the void after, there's other traumas that appear. And so I think it's also an aspect of this exhibition that we see the wars as something that is happening right now and we hope that they end soon. But it doesn't work like that. These traumas are surviving generations. They're passed on,
I saw in your catalog that the process of creating this exhibition was organic. Hannah Ryggen is quite a political artist. The world changing as you were working, does that have something to do with how you built the exhibition?
Absolutely. Janja Michalina is an artist, a researcher, and a curator who is very political. And inevitably, the process was listening to what's happening around us in our time. And so through also listening to her and being very attentive to the conversations, and the topic became very political in many ways, and also paid attention to the many crises that are happening around us on many levels. So, this is something that we as a medium-sized institution in safe Norway isn't always so aware of. So with her critical view on us, we definitely had to think more thoroughly through how we speak as an institution about these topics, and actually also pushed us to talk about the ongoing genocide in Palestine, for example. It's not easy. I mean, realities do look incredibly different from the Norwegian safe, social democratic standpoint. If we are able, through an exhibition, to convey some of that, then it's a success, in my opinion.
Matter and materiality, Hannah Ryggen, how she was so involved with her material and creating her own colors. And also this exhibition is quite diverse in terms of what kind of art, what actual materials the art are made of, how it's presented.
Hannah Ryggen, she was self-taught. She had gone to art school and learned how to paint, and she brought that into the textile art. But she took a sort of radical choice to say, I'm going to switch mediums now, and I'm going to go really all the way. Living on the island of my husband, across the fjord here from Trondheim, Fosen, and where she was taking wool from the sheep in the garden. Then she would dye the yarn with the colors from the plants growing around, and even from urine. She was very famous for this potteblå, which is an indigo color fixed with urine. But she didn't see herself still as an arts and crafts artist the way we look at it today. That was a word that developed in the 1970s in Norway, in a sort of very local tradition of the arts and crafts sort of movement. So I think that we see her today as a sort of artist of the textile, and she herself was very proud of the work she did and on the loom that her husband had built for her, but she was first and foremost an artist, a visual artist.
So we're standing in front of Hannah Ryggen's Grini. Tell us about this piece.
Yeah, this is a tapestry made in 1945 in colors of reds with a central motif of a man sitting in a sort of brown suit, prison suit, overall. This is Hannah Ryggen's husband, Hans. They lived a quite sort of symbiotic relationship, I think, out on the island. And I think that for her, when he went, she was just paralyzed, I think. This is a painting made in 1945, and he was only free in May, so this is something that's made in the second half of 1945, when she finally could start work again. In this motif, we see also a woman, curiously naked, on horseback, who's approaching him when he's sitting there with gray faces hiding in the background and people behind barbed wires. So the prison is there, and here comes this beautiful naked woman on horseback. And that is supposedly their daughter Mona, with a pack of flowers, which is somehow as a piece of Fosen, to comfort him, probably. The whole work is like a cry for him to come back, but it's probably made after he came back, since she was unable to work when he was incarcerated. Trondheim Kunstmuseum only owns a few pieces by Hannah Ryggen. And this one was given to us as a sole piece when she also decided to donate all of his paintings. 365 paintings in pretty critical condition because they were poor, and his paintings are made from poor materials. This was like a trade-off because she was definitely somebody all of her professional career, and she knew it. Her husband was not. So it was a way to ensure his work for the future.
Yeah, it's quite sweet, romantic.
Yeah, definitely.
Grini depicts, obviously, war and how families are affected by that, which is a theme that runs throughout this exhibition. Maybe we can go have a look at some of the more contemporary artists showcasing this kind of theme.
In this work, we see a large installation made by very sort of domestic and simple materials, soil, bricks, rice. And on top of them are some rihals or book stands that are used for religious scripture, both Muslim and Hindu in this case, because it refers to this work, which is entitled When the Gun is Raised, Dialogue Stops, Women's Voices from the Kashmir Valley. It's a work from 2000 by Indian artist Shiba Shachi and Sonia Jabbar, a collaborative work, which is a result of years of research on the ground in Kashmir. They landed in Kashmir and started interviewing women who live there, who were affected by this territorial war that has been going on, where men were always being portrayed in wars with guns and with that part of the war we know very well, and they wanted to give space for women and their experiences of war. And they wanted to give all of these different ethnicities and religious, groups a voice and have them together in this work. In this work, they really put up these objects to bind together rather than to emphasize the dichotomies and the black and white way that we conceive all of these conflicts. And this work is from 2000, but from a war we know very well that has been going on and still is going on, that is still, contesting this territory. And as Shiba said when she was here, I wish this work was not interesting anymore. I wish that nobody wanted to see it anymore, that it didn't have any sort of actuality anymore, but it does. And the links to what's going on in both Ukraine and in Palestine is just too striking. I mean, it's a way the work is also orchestrated where you bend over these photos and these testimonies to just be there with them and listen to their voices, and it creates empathy. There are humans behind these.
For Monocle in Trondheim, I'm Nora Josefine Hoel.
The Hannah Ryggen Triennale 2025 runs until the 14th of September in venues across Trondheim. And that's all for today's show. For more design stories, listen to our 5-minute midweek bonus show, Monocle on Design Extra, which airs on Thursdays. And if you enjoy print, then do pick up a copy of Monocle magazine as well. It's on all good newsstands now. Today's episode was produced and edited by Maylee Evans. I'm Nick Manise. Thanks for listening.